Welcome to Ancient Life Hacks. I'm Jared Madsen. I have a master's degree in Chinese medicine. I lived in China for many years. I'm fluent in Chinese. And today we will be talking about the common cold. So in the West, we don't really have a whole lot that we can do for the common cold. But ancient Chinese wisdom has a few tricks. So today we will be talking about the concept of what a cold is according to Chinese medicine. We will talk then about some things that we should do to try and prevent getting a cold, then what we should do when we get a cold, and we will round everything off at the end with some herbal formulas, and particularly some herbs or spices that you probably already have in your kitchen that you can use to make a kind of a makeshift decoction, makeshift herbal formula to possibly help with the cold. So let's dive in. Now, I would recommend, you can skip to the end if you want. If you want to say, look, I just want to get a few little recipes, you can do that. But I would highly recommend you sit through the first part, okay? I'll try and make it as interesting and exciting as possible. It is very interesting, but we are going to go into the mechanics, according to Chinese medicine, of how a cold works. So if you understand how it works, you will have a better understanding of how to prevent it, and you'll also have a good understanding of what to do so that these herbs and spices and some of these different tricks that we have will make more sense. So let's dive in. Traditional Chinese medicine identifies various environmental influences as pathogenic factors that can invade the body and cause illness. The most common factors involved in a cold are... Okay, so I'm going to pause right there before I read these. To put that another way, Chinese medicine says that there are 6 evils that are outside our body. So we can call those pathogens, something like that, that are trying to get in our body and to harm us. Okay, so we're not going to go over all 6. We have 4 right here. The other 2 we don't really need because it doesn't really have much to do with the common cold. So the first one is wind. All right, often considered the primary cause of colds, it acts as a carrier for other pathogenic factors. Wind is seen as quick and changing, similar to the sudden onset of cold symptoms. So basically you can think of it like this. Wind is out there blowing around, and that itself is a pathogenic factor that tries to get into your body. Now, how does it get into your body? Well, it can get in through the mouth or nose. So already we kind of go, okay, well, if I go outside in, say, winter when it's real windy out, or I guess anytime it's windy out, maybe stop being a mouth breather, right? Close my mouth, maybe get a scarf, something like that to kind of block it if it's really windy and cold, because we don't want that wind to enter our mouth, because that can enter our body that way. Another way, a pretty common way that people don't realize, is that it enters through your pores. How does it enter through your pores? Well, when you sweat. So for instance, say you're jogging, right, and you start to sweat, or sometimes even if you just walk around a little bit, even in the winter, or when it's anytime that it's kind of windy, you might be sweating a little bit. Your pores open up, and this just then creates these countless little gateways, these little doors where things from the outside can come in and things from the inside can go out, right? We usually sweat to help ourselves cool down. It pushes more than just water. It can push other things out as well. So in this situation, we want to be careful of sweating out in the wind. Another thing is we would want to be sure if it's windy out that we wear, at very least a windbreaker. I mean, it matters how cold it is, but you don't want the wind blowing directly on your skin if you are sweating, especially if it's really cold out, because that is a way that the wind will then take the second evil, the second pathogen, which is cold, and bring that through the pores and bring that into your body. Cold invades the body and can lead to symptoms like chills, lack of sweating, we're going to get to that, and a runny nose with clear discharge. That's kind of basic prevention. Just be careful when you go outside. Another thing is if your house is kind of drafty and then the wind. So basically, the wind enters the pores like we discussed, and then it can have something like cold riding on its back. So if you have a cold wind, then you get what we call in Chinese medicine a wind cold, or in the West, we would just call it a common cold. I mean, it's kind of funny that we use the same word, right? We say, I've got a cold. In Chinese medicine, yeah, they say it's a wind cold. Cold is an actual pathogen. It's this negative energy that is come and gotten into your body. Another pathogen is heat. Heat can cause symptoms like fever, sore throat, and nasal discharge. So generally, we get the common cold in the winter. So what usually happens is that cold rides on the back of wind, and that enters the body first. Then the stagnation and the inability for the body to sweat because of the cold, to push the cold out. So we talked about the pores can bring stuff in and push it out. What your body should be doing at that point, we're going to get to some techniques of how you do this later. What it should do is it should sweat. You should get under the covers and get a good sweat going, and that should push that wind cold out. That's like the very beginnings of a cold. If you are not able to do that, the cold cannot move, it gets stuck, and then that gets transformed into heat. And so that's when you start getting symptoms like fever, sore throat, yellow nasal discharge. Usually what happens is it's not necessarily wind heat entered your body, it's wind cold entered your body, and then that got a little bit deeper and that changed into wind heat. One other thing that we'll talk about of the pathogens that could enter as well is going to be dampness. Dampness leads to symptoms like a feeling of heaviness, fatigue, and a cough of phlegm in the throat. So sometimes you may have wind cold damp, or you may have wind heat damp. You usually don't have wind cold heat damp or wind heat cold damp, because heat and cold are kind of the opposites. You usually have one or the other, but they can switch back and forth between the two. Okay, so these are the main evils, the main pathogens that would enter the body. Now, how does our body deal with that? Weakness of the body's defensive energy, or Wei Qi. Okay, Wei Qi. Qi is just your energy. I've done a whole video on that. And one of these energies, and the most important one for today's topic, is the Wei Qi, or the defensive Qi. So your defensive energy, which is considered to really be flowing on the surface of your skin. It's almost even a little bit outside your body. Like it's just under your skin, just on the skin, a little bit outside. This energy protects us from these pathogens from entering in the first place. So naturally, we would want to have as strong of defensive Qi, or Wei Qi, as we can. Because if it is very strong, and say you are sweating and running around outside, but your Qi is very strong, your defensive Qi is very strong, then that will help in preventing those pathogens from entering through the pores of your body. Now, if you have very weak Wei Qi, or very weak defensive Qi, like you might barely go outside. You might walk by your house and there's a little bit of a draft and you could come down with this wind cold because its defenses are down, right? Basically, the wind cold just walks right into your body and does whatever it wants. So we are going to talk a little bit now about how we strengthen Wei Qi. So Wei Qi is akin to the immune system in Western medicine. It circulates on the surface of the body and is responsible for defending against external pathogens. Factors that can weaken Wei Qi are, so we'll talk first about what will weaken the Wei Qi. One is a poor diet. An imbalanced diet can weaken the spleen, the pancreas, the stomach, which in turn affects production of Qi, including Wei Qi. So if you want the details about how Qi is made, you can watch my other video on Qi. We talked for a long time about that. We did a deep dive into it. But basically, most of it comes from the air you breathe and the food you eat. So a bad diet will create weak Qi, which then the Qi goes and forms all the other different types of Qi, which then would mean you probably would end up having weak defensive Qi. So have a good diet. That's just a standard thing that we should do no matter what. Overwork and stress. Chronic stress and overwork can deplete the body's energy and weaken the immune system. Insufficient sleep can impair the body's ability to regenerate qi, including Wei Qi. When pathogenic factors invade the body, the strength of the Wei Qi determines the extent of the illness. If the Wei Qi is strong, the body can fend off the pathogens, or the illness will be mild. If the Wei Qi is weak, the illness can take hold more easily and symptoms may be more severe. Chinese medicine also acknowledges that changes in the seasons and weather can make the body more susceptible to colds, especially transitions from one season to another when the body needs to adjust to new conditions. Right, so in summary, we want to have our Wei Qi as strong as possible. Also, we want to avoid situations where we would more easily be able to catch a cold. So basically, being outside, drafty cold houses, things like that. So before we dive into what we do when we get a cold, let's look at some things, some very specific things that we can do. In traditional Chinese medicine, quality sleep is essential for the restoration and balance of yin and yang energies in the body. Sleep is the time when the body repairs itself and consolidates energy. Insufficient sleep can lead to deficiency of yin, weakening the body's defenses. So more specifically, when you sleep, there's a couple things that happen, and this happens at different points throughout the night. So there's a couple things that we want to focus on for this. One is when your body actually lies flat and you go to bed, especially if you go to bed at a good time. I would recommend 10 p.m. or earlier even if you want to be super pro. The blood of your body then can enter into the liver, it can get processed, it can get purified, and that will help strengthen your blood and strengthen your qi. Okay, so that's why sometimes, like if you wake up in the morning and you have rosy red cheeks, right, that shows that qi has been strengthened, and now that the qi in your body is much stronger. Now, another thing is from 3 to 5 a.m., it is the lung organ. And so as long as we're sleeping, we have good quality air, good fresh air, not stale, cold, drafty air, but good air where we're sleeping. That time from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. is a time that the lungs are not only regenerating themselves, they're also working on producing qi that is then pushed down. I went over the whole process in another video, but that energy gets pushed down and it combines with other qi, and then it forms this zongqi, which then forms this defensive qi. So basically, the concept is from 3 to 5 a.m. we want to be asleep and let our lungs do what they do best, okay? And so then you will often kind of get this gasp of air, usually later, closer to like 4:30 or 5 a.m., and that's your lungs telling you that, hey, I've done my thing, I'm done, you can wake up now. Whether you wake up or not, I guess, is your choice. I would highly recommend waking up them, but I know it might be hard for some people. So, establishing a regular sleep routine, creating a comfortable sleep environment, avoiding stimulating activities or heavy meals before bedtime can contribute to better sleep quality. Okay, and then things like meditating and whatnot before bed. So basically, it's just putting more of an emphasis on sleep in general, because sleep helps purify your qi, strengthen your qi, and produce more qi. And that's what we need to keep the bad stuff away. Dressing appropriately. Traditional Chinese medicine emphasizes the importance of protecting the body, especially the neck and upper back, from exposure to cold and wind. Wearing scarves or layers during colder weather can help. So just dress appropriately, right? Especially if you don't have very strong qi to begin with. But even if you do, you might as well. What does it hurt? Why not dress appropriately when you're out and about? Avoiding overly air-conditioned or heated rooms is also important. So in the summer, sometimes we go from an air-conditioned room out into the heat and then back again. We go back and forth. And that's why people get colds in the summer. It's this all of a sudden change of environment, right? Like you're outside, you might be sweating, and then you basically walk into a refrigerator, right? You walk into some place that's all of a sudden really cold. That cold, since your pores are open, it just immediately enters in your body through the pores. So that is something to be careful of in the summer. And then in the winter, of course, it's if you go from extreme colds to then extreme heats inside, you want to have, no matter which way you're doing it, you want to kind of ease in a little bit. And other ways to strengthen your qi would be something like meditation, qigong, tai chi, yoga, practices like this. A lot of these slow moving exercises are good for your body as well. It's good to just get your meridians open, get everything working. That's what we want. Okay, so now we will talk about what do you do when you actually get a cold. So we have done everything humanly possible. We have avoided wind and we have sealed off all the drafts in our house, and we do not go from extreme temperatures, and we don't run around and sweat outside, and we eat well and we sleep well. But we still got a cold. It happens. It happens no matter how hard you try. Sometimes it just happens. So what do we do now? Right? Well, a lot of this is rather intuitive, but some of it you might go, oh, I didn't know that. Rest and conserve energy. Rest is considered vital in Chinese medicine for preserving and restoring the body's energy or qi. So we talked about that in prevention. It's going to be the exact same thing when you get a cold. It's important to reduce physical activity and get adequate sleep to allow the body to combat the pathogen effectively. I'm going to take that a few steps further. You also don't want to be too active mentally, okay? You want to let your mind relax as well, because in Chinese medicine, mind and matter are the same thing. They're just different reflections of each other. So you don't want to be running around while you have a cold. You also don't want to be thinking too hard while you have a cold. Another couple things you can do, I'm going to say it, you're not going to like it, but you want to know what? It makes sense. Stop the coffee, stop the tea. At the very least, greatly reduce it, but probably stop. Because what you really want to do, when we get a cold, what we really want to do is just recover as quickly as possible, right? If you really, really have something to do, then you need to find ways to manage that while you have a cold. But basically, what you want to do is, like, once you get a cold, it's just going to be a process of getting that resolved. So make it as easy for your body to completely resolve that as quickly as possible. Caffeine, when you got a cold, just don't drink it. The fact of the matter is that drinking caffeine doesn't let you sleep. And especially if you're somebody who's kind of needs caffeine, you need coffee to function. When you go off coffee, you will find that you sleep a lot more. And you want to know what? Hey, that's perfect. When you have a cold, if you quit coffee cold turkey, you might just end up sleeping a lot, which is what your body wants to do anyway. It's like you've been drinking coffee all this time and you needed good sleep anyway. That might have been part of the problem in the first place. So, okay, take a few days, take a week, however long it takes, and don't drink any coffee. So you want your body to rest. You want to not work hard, not think a whole lot, and then ideally you can sleep as much as possible. Another thing is going to be adjust your diet. So in a little bit, we'll get into some specific things that we can take. But generally speaking, dietary changes are recommended to support the body's healing. For wind cold type colds, we're going to get into the symptoms of those later, okay, when we get into the specific things that we take. Wind cold type colds, warm and spicy foods like ginger, garlic, and onions are encouraged to expel the cold. For wind heat type colds, cooling foods like pears and chrysanthemum tea are beneficial. It's generally advisable to avoid dairy, oily, and heavy foods as they can produce phlegm and hinder the flow of qi. Okay, that was a lot all of a sudden. Let's go over that again. Actually, we're going to go over those details when we go over the specific symptoms of trying to figure out, do you have wind cold, wind heat, do you have dampness? We'll dive into that in a little bit here. stay warm. Whether you have wind, heat, wind, cold, whatever you got, you want to stay warm. Keeping the body warm is crucial, especially the neck and shoulders, to prevent further invasion of cold. It's also recommended to avoid exposure to cold and windy conditions. One would think that should be obvious, but I see a lot of people who don't do that. Gargle with salt water. For sore throats, a salt water gargle can be beneficial. It helps clear phlegm and reduce inflammation. All right, so now we're going to go over what a wind cold invasion is, what a wind heat invasion is, and then we're going to do a deep dive into what these look like, and then we'll have some formulas, some spices, some herbs. What do we do? How do we deal with it? So the basic idea of a wind cold is that cold has ridden on the back of wind. It has entered in through your pores, and then it comes in your pores and it closes the door behind it. It closes your pores. So the symptoms you get are chills, slight fever, no sweating, headache, and stiff neck. You might get some, you might get all of these, you might get none of these. But that is because you can just imagine that this wind cold has come in and then the coldness has tightened up the pores. It has closed the pores. So that's why you're not getting sweating, right? It's cold, so you get a little bit of chills, but you might get a fever because you might even get a little bit of a fever because wind cold has a tendency to transition into wind heat. So the symptoms for wind heat are fever, sore throat, slight chills, sweating, and a cough. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit of the opposite, right? Instead of feeling cold, you're generally going to feel warm. You probably have a fever. You might get that sore throat, right? You might have congestion in the nose. It would be yellow at that point. If it's a wind cold and you have a little bit of congestion, it would be white or clear. Okay, so because heat is like fire, so it makes everything kind of like warm and burns it up. And so yellow is more like fire, whereas clear is more like cold, right? All right, so now what we're going to do, we're going to have a little bit of fun. This is a textbook on formulas, on herbology. We're going to read about these symptoms, these wind colds from the textbook before we dive into the herbs and what we want to use. So wind cold disorders, I will leave a link in the description below so you can buy this book if you want. This is pro level. This is what they would use in a college for their basic formulas book. Wind cold disorders are marked by fever and chills predominant, head and body aches, clear or white secretions, nasal discharge, and a floating pulse. A floating pulse just means when you go to take a pulse, when you go to take your pulse, it feels like you barely touch your pulse and you feel a pulse. That's a floating pulse. So in Chinese medicine, taking a pulse is very important. It's more than just the speed. It's a lot more than just the speed. It's the quality. It's the levels of the pulse. So this is just one aspect. If you touch your fingers on here ever so slightly and you can feel your pulse like real easily, you might be coming down with a cold. All right, there are many types of wind cold disorders and all require the use of formulas that release pathogenic influences from the exterior by inducing sweating. So that's kind of, everything all kind of goes back to sweating. For wind cold, you want to sweat. You want to open the pores. You want to get those pathogens pushed out. You want your defensive qi to push them out. When you do that, when you take any of these formulas, or if you just feel like maybe you just drink a little bit of warm water and you start to sweat, or you just start to sweat, be sure that you're wearing ample clothing, get in bed, get under the covers, and have a nice good sweat. You do that because your pores are open, and we don't want anything to come back in as well, right? You're trying to push the wind cold out, but if you aren't really dressed well and you live in a drafty house, or even go outside while you're sweating with a cold, you're just going to make it all worse. When wind cold attacks an individual whose protective qi is strong, the cold can close up the pores and prevent sweating. Such patients require a formula that strongly induces sweating. If the protective qi is weak, the defensive qi, what we called it, there will be sweating, but the condition will not improve. This is because the defensive qi is too weak to force out the pathogenic influence. In such instances, treatment still requires sweating, but it must be accompanied by appropriate regulation of the protective and nutritive qi that the sweating will have a therapeutic effect. So we're not going to go into all of those details of the various types of qi that you need to have regulated. You just want to keep in mind that keep yourself strong so that your defensive qi is strong, and then when it's time to push everything out, that qi can really help and push it out. If it doesn't get pushed out, maybe you try some of these, it doesn't get pushed out, it will transition into wind heat, and then that's going to be a whole other thing to deal with. So right now we're going to dive into some formulas that you can use and also foods. So the foods are going to be ginger, garlic, onions, scallions, things like that. You're going to want to incorporate those into your diet. I would highly recommend making soups as well. There's a reason we eat chicken noodle soup when we have cold. The reason is it's real easy to digest, and you want foods that are very, very easy to digest. One, so that you don't use too much of your energy on digestion. And two, as we talked about previously, qi is made from the air we breathe and the food we eat. So if we can have some good, nutritious food that is very easy for the body to digest and absorb those energies and nutrients, then in theory, you should make strong defensive qi even while you have a cold, and that will help in resolving your cold. So those are some things that we want to incorporate. And those three things in particular, and other spices do this as well, are considered acrid or pungent. And they're also warm, so they help warm the body. So it basically brings your energy up to the surface and then pushes it out, opens up your pores and pushes it out. That's why we especially eat those when we have a wind cold. So what we're going to do is we will look at some of the formulas. Now, so I've got the book here. I'm going to dive into one of the formulas. I'm going to dive into the one formula. There's many formulas, but this is the one that I have seen is quite effective, and it works well for kind of a wider variety of wind cold. Like you can have, I mean, we could keep talking about this forever. We can then break wind cold down in different types of wind cold. But this one is good for many types. And this is cinnamon twig decoction. That's right. Cinnamon is the main thing. And you might say to yourself, hey, Jared, I've got cinnamon in my kitchen. So you will be able to make something very similar to this. So this formula is basically it's cinnamon, but it's the twig. The cinnamon that we use as the spice is one of the inner linings so cinnamon is a tree, right? And this is a type of bark. This is like not the outside bark and it's not the inner part. It's this inner lining just under the bark. That's usually what we use for the cinnamon spice. Now this herbal formula, generally it wants the whole twig, but you want to know what? Close enough, right? If you don't have access to a cinnamon tree, but you do have cinnamon from the grocery store, probably good enough, right? I've seen this seems to be good enough. Another herb is xiaoyao. You're not probably going to have access to that, so don't worry about that. But then fresh ginger. Okay, we mentioned fresh ginger as a food. Now we have fresh ginger here. Dazao. Those are Chinese dates. Those are red dates. You might have access to that as well. And licorice. Okay, not the candy. Would you have access to licorice? Do we have that in the kitchen? Do we use it? Maybe. If you do, all the better. The main thing, though, is cinnamon. Okay, so what I would recommend doing, if you don't have all of those, I can leave this, I'll leave it on the website. How about that? ancientlifehacks.com. If you want to go all in, but in this case, I would just, if you're going to go all in, you might as well just go see a practitioner of herbology, a Chinese medical practitioner, to get them to give you the good stuff. But if you feel like you have some of these symptoms and you want to try something at home, this is what I would do if I'm in your shoes. Take a pot, put some water in it, take some cinnamon, a good amount, right? If you have powder or the stick, whatever, put that in. Put in some ginger. If you have some red dates, even better, put that in. The main thing is the main thing is cinnamon. The second would probably be ginger to help warm the inside of your body. And the dates are more to kind of keep everything nice and balanced. If you just put those 3 things in a pot, boil it for like 20 minutes, put your pajamas on, drink that, go into your bed and go under the covers, you might feel a lot better after that. In fact, if your luck is going for you, that might kind of just resolve it. You might do that, and then after you sweat, that'll get you sweating, and that'll get the stuff pushed out. You might, after that, still take it easy, but you might be like, you want to know what? I think I just dodged a bullet there, right? Pretty simple thing to do. I'm glad you waited this long for that little trick. That's big trick. And you want to know what? If you're going out traveling somewhere, take a little bit of, worst case scenario, take some cinnamon, some powdered cinnamon, put it in your bag, right? Say you fly somewhere and you're like, I feel like I'm coming down with something. Get some hot water. If you're in a hotel, use the coffee machine, but don't make coffee. Just get some hot water from that. Put your powdered cinnamon, just put a little bit of cinnamon in that and drink that and do the same thing, get under the covers. Is it as good? No, obviously not, but it might do the trick. It might do the trick. Just a little bit of cinnamon powder might do the trick, help you with your wind cold. All right. So now we will dive into wind heat. So say you didn't get that resolved, right? You couldn't get it resolved. You tried. It was a valiant effort, but it transitioned into wind heat, or maybe it just started as wind heat, right? Or maybe you came down with something, you didn't realize it, and it just kind of became wind heat. Okay? Wind heat, a little bit harder to deal with than wind cold. So let's go over we're reading the book here. We're reading the medical book. Externally contracted wind heat disorders are characterized by fever, sweating, a slight aversion to wind or slight chills, headache, thirst, and sore throat. There may also be a cough or redness of the eyes, right? So you think about it, all this is heat, it's fire, right? The tongue coating is white or slightly yellow, indicating, if it's slightly yellow, that indicates that heat has not permeated deeply enough to cause a purely yellow coating. So the more yellow it is, that means the deeper this thing has gone, the worse it is. And the pulse is floating and rapid. So we talked about the floating pulse already, and rapid is pretty self-explanatory. If you try and take your pulse and it's like, that's rapid. All right, so that is wind heat. All right, so some foods that we want to eat during wind heat are going to be cooling foods, right? Like pears, chrysanthemum tea, things like that. We also want to be sure that we are avoiding dairy. You want to know what? You want to avoid dairy and oily foods, heavy foods pretty much all the time, because those can produce phlegm. And even if you have phlegm already, phlegm is hard to get rid of, and that blocks your qi from flowing. That blocks your defensive qi. So if you don't have phlegm, don't start drinking sodas and dairy and things like that and have yourself get more phlegm or get phlegm in the first place. That would be just not a smart move. Stay away from, to put it another way, stay away from dairy when you have a cold. Just stay away from it. There is a little bit of a complicated formula. A lot of this stuff you might not have at home, but you want to know what? Some you probably do. Okay, so one is going to be honeysuckle flower, 金银花 in Chinese. You may or may not have this at home. Chinese grocery stores usually always have it because sometimes it's just combined with tea. It's just this little flower, and people like to put it in their tea and just drink it in the tea, especially in the summer. Why? Because it helps clear heat. So if you have a wind heat, if you have the strong fever and the sore throat and all of that stuff, it might be worth getting some honeysuckle tea. If you don't have honeysuckle tea, or just honeysuckle flowers to make to make this with, you might have chrysanthemum. Okay, chrysanthemum is kind of, for our purpose here, I know herbologists might freak out at me, but for our purposes here, it kind of does the same thing. There's probably a higher chance that you have chrysanthemum tea than honeysuckle tea. So you could use, honestly, you could just drink some chrysanthemum tea. Probably would help some. Another herb that you may have is mint. Any kind of mint, spearmint, peppermint, whatever mint you have. It can be dried, it can be fresh, it can be any mint that you want. So those two things. So a flower, whether that be chrysanthemum or honeysuckle, or if you have both, throw them both in. Why not? And then some mint. You can have either the flower, you can make a tea, you can make a mint tea, you can combine those together and make a tea as well. You could have it a little bit of honey, but not too much because we don't want you to get phlegmy, right? And that is going to help cool you off from the wind heat. And it's more of just letting your body naturally do what it needs to do to get rid of the wind heat. All right, that is it for the common cold. We didn't get into acupuncture. We'll do one quick acupuncture thing before we leave. We should do a whole thing on acupuncture at some point. But the acupuncture point right here in Chinese, it's called hegu. This is the most common acupuncture point. If you know any acupuncture point, this is probably it. And everybody says, hey, this is good for headaches. Yes, for some specific type of headaches. If you want to know more about headaches, please leave that. Let me know in the comments below, because there are all different types of headaches, because there are a lot of different meridians that are going on your head. And so this helps with some, but not all. So you would want to figure out what kind of headache you have, why you're getting it. Is it chronic? Is it a headache because you're catching a cold? But generally speaking, we'll go with it for now. Generally speaking, this is good for kind of a wide variety of headaches. So basically, how you find it is you have a bone right here, you got a bone right there on your thumb. It's generally a little bit closer to this bone on your hand. You slide your finger, and if you just slide your finger, you'll notice it feels like a little bit of a depression. It almost feels like your finger just sticks. It just stops there. That's the spot. If you can't find it, don't worry about it. It's generally considered one of the larger acupuncture points. Sometimes said it's as big as a quarter. So you basically just take your thumb, put it on here, I'll try and so you can see. Try and massage, just massage this area. You can do both sides. It may or may not help because, again, it's not for all headaches. You can try it. I would probably stick more with the rest and try some of these herbal formulas and get your body to sweat if you have wind cold under the covers. That's going to be the main thing. All right, that's it. Now, I said no coffee. So if you have a cold, don't drink this wonderful day's coffee. But if you don't have a cold, and you say to yourself, hey, Jared, I want some coffee that has only 15% the caffeine of regular. I want to say you can almost drink this while you have a cold, but you want to know what? Probably don't. Just don't drink any coffee. But if you have to, if you say, no, I need at least 15% caffeine, well, then this is going to be the coffee for you. I've left a link in the description below. It uses this cool 50 enzyme complex to naturally get rid of the caffeine. So I've made other videos about coffee. There are many benefits to coffee, and by greatly reducing the caffeine, especially in a natural way, you can get rid of one of the big side effects. Also, that's it for me for this week. I will see everyone next week. Take care.